Hello, everyone. Um, the Black Cat, a story written by the American uh, novelist Edgar Allan Poe. It is a horrifying story of animal abuse and murder. It is told in the first person by a man who undergoes an alarming change of character. When he was young, this man was gentle natured and he was even kind to animals. But when he became adult, he fell into drunkenness and he started abusing and then killing his pet cat, then murdered his long-suffering wife. The story is at once chilling tale that is hard to put down and a psychological study of an extremely disturbed mind. It is typical of Poe's work as a whole, and it is a very perfect example of Gothic literature. So in this story, I'm going to explain the elements of the short story, the language and structure of the text. The narrator starts with conveying a horrific atmosphere, employing expressions such as wild and senses and reject. And at the same time, he repeated the word mad twice at the beginning, which is a matter of affronting in terms of language, which is a very useful device that makes the reader anticipate the madness of the narrator. And by fronting, I mean that linguistic element which is brought into the beginning of a sentence, which is not its suitable place. He wants us to believe his story, and this is asserted by negating the verb dream at the end of the paragraph. The next paragraph is a journey into the past, then to the present, up to the future, which we have different types of references, in fact. And the exposition level is established by flash forward, which is asserted by the word tomorrow I die, which is a matter of a prolepsis in narratological terms. And a prolepsis is a reference to future, to event which is not happening now. And this establishes the sense of horror for the upcoming of the execution on the gallows. The present situation today, I would unburden my soul, is said to go off telling a tale in the past connected to the narrator's position in the jail. And the use of the present perfect at the end of the paragraph is to connect the terrifying events with his current situation. These events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Then the narrator wants us to get assured that his viewpoint of being reliable is rendered in this particular plain style when telling the story through consecutive circumstantial structures. And by circumstantial structures, I mean those adverbial and the prepositional phrases in terms of functional grammar. Thus, he said plainly, succinctly, and without comment. Okay, let's move to the third paragraph, in which we find the element of suspense, and still we have in the exposition phase in terms of plot structure. Now, the narrator tries to create an atmosphere of suspense, mystification, and horror through repeating verbs such as terrified, tortured, and destroyed, and nouns just like horror and awe, then some adjectives just like terrible and excitable. Suspense is conveyed through the invitation made by the narrator to make us evaluate his situation in comparison with the others. This evaluation is asserted by the repetition of the intensifying adverb less and more. Now, the beginning of the complication phase, talking about other animals at the moment of he is in a prison now, and he remembers his animals, and he said that in an emotional style. Now, the narrator uses short sentences when discussing his childhood and manhood before the personality change. His writing style in this phase shows the narrator's emotional state. His emotions are made explicit at the lexical level also. For example, he used concrete and abstract nouns or positive attributes: docility, humanity, tenderness, companions, jest, pleasure, affection, faithful, love, heart, friendship, and fidelity. He also uses adjectives of positive connotation, just like conspicuous, fond, indulged, happy, sagacious, derivable, unselfish, sacrificing, portray, and gossamer. Verbs also of delighted activities are made there: make, spent, grew, derived, and cherished. The repeated intensifier so is also used to create a sort of emotions. The image of the internal change is enhanced by the narrator's confession when he said this peculiarity of character. Now the complication phase is still at the beginning, and now he turns to talk about his wife and some other animals. The style is still emotional, but now he used another technique which is called a synthetic listing. By a synthetic listing, it means that when you are trying to list a series of things or people or anything, but without the use of and. The opposite is synthetic listing, which is the use of and whenever we are trying to count something. Now the narrator in this particular paragraph continues the same emotional style at the lexical level. Adjectives with or without head nouns: happy, not congenial, agreeable kind. And short sentences were used there when he now turns talking about his wife and when providing a list of animals, a synthetic listing. I said that before. The narrator presents a synthetic listing of animals. This narrative technique helps show the narrator's breathless excitement of will to tell us more about his animals, and at the same time it exposes his chaotic confusion of his current situation. The wife here in this particular moment is a major character, dynamic and round. In the next paragraph, the narrator introduces his wife in more detail, and besides we have the introduction of the second major character, which is Pluto. The same style here is followed. The narrator adopts the emotional style when he describes the cat and the wife. Now he used short coordinated sentences as an extended monologue and capturing the breathless excitement of remembering his pet when he said, this latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. This is what is meant by the idea of using coordinated sentences, but short. Then in the last part of the paragraph, he said, I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. The use of and is what is to link to sentences or to clauses or to phrases, short coordinated expressions. Now this is the extended monologue purpose for using such structures in this particular moment. Also, the narrator uses emotional lexical choice or positive stance, in fact, synthetic listing here with the use of and when I say synthetic listing. A remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious, my favorite pet and playmate. Pluto here in this particular way is introduced as a round and dynamic character. Also, this paragraph shows a sense of terror which is established by his wife's reference to the idea of associating the black cat with witches when she said all black cats as witches in disguise. After that, we face the internal conflict, a change for the worse, which is inside the narrator. Now the narrator's style shifts into longer, complex sentences that show a complex mind, because the narrator's mind has complicated ideas and psychological disorders and struggles. Such complex structures suggest the narrator's intensity of thought. The narrator employed internal appositive structures, temporal expressions, a synthetic listing without the use of and relative clauses. For example, when he said our friendship lasted in this manner, this is a positive sentence, in this manner, for several years, temporal expressions, during which my general temperament and character through the instrumentality of the fiend and temperance. You see, all of these are what? Appositive structures. Now the main verb is had. I blush to confess it, had experienced. This is the main verb, you see? And day by day is also what a matter of repetition, which indicates a temporal reference. More moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. The repetition of more here is what is the idea of the narrator's excitement. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, it is also what a temporal expression. Now, when he said at the last part of the paragraph, by accident, through affection, me for what disease is like alcohol, and at length, and consequently somewhat peevish. All of these are what are appositive structures which hinder the movement of the structure of the entire clause or the sentence. This is indicated by by the idea of how the narrator is what is trying to show to us he is experiencing some sort of interior monologue. Now, the first person narrator, in fact, is limited and omniscient, for he can show only his thoughts and feelings, but he can provide also judgments and evaluations about others. When the expression in this paragraph is confessed by the idea of the fiend intemperance, it is a religious reference which is quoted from the Bible. This shows that the narrator has knowledge of the Bible. Now, in terms of the Bible, the narrator not only uses religious terms, he also quotes verses of phrases from the Bible. When he said, "Here at last, then my labor has not been in vain." And these allusions indicate that the narrator is educated in this domain. And in contrast to the Christian domain, where God is the ruler of the world and will return to earth to judge people according to their deeds one day, the name of the cat alludes to an ancient mythology where Pluto is the ruler of the underworld. The assumption arises that Poe intentionally used this name as a symbol of justice in the story. This puts the cat in a supernatural position, as a supernatural creature, and the reader might associate Pluto's coming back to take his revenge with the second coming of the Lord. But my Lord, shield and deliver me from the fangs of the archfiend. This is a later reference, in fact. The next paragraph, in terms of structure, there is a syndeton, and we have horrible actions and emotional state. The asyndetic listing in the following narrative is useful for making the protagonist more dramatic in behavior and vivid in description and exposition of his emotional state through providing details concerning dramatic behavior, vivid description, and emotional state. The narrator tries to distance himself from his guilt when confessing the fury of a demon. So when he said, "One night returning home, much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him when, in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth." the fury of a demon instantly possessed me. So he's trying what to make himself not guilty, and he's trying what to attribute the crime to the idea of being intoxication under the control of what of evil. So that is the idea. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder while I pen the damnable atrocity. You know, this is a very direct confession made by the narrator himself in order what to tell that it is not all his fault. It is also what the cat himself when he is trying to avoid the narrator the moment he arrives home. Now, the style of narrating the fast events in this particular moment is not associated with the use of and. Why? Because the use of and is going to hinder the movement of reading the clauses, the sentences. So when the narrator used this particular style, which is called a synthetic style, without the use of coordinators, conjunctions, without the use of and, we find that the events move faster and faster. The next paragraph shows the narrator's inner world, which is controlled totally by devil. And the style in this particular paragraph is a complicated style. It is haunted with long complex structures. The paragraph is divided into two long sentences, which is a matter of his conflict with himself, a mixture of the synthetic and asynthetic listing that show his internal struggle. Sometimes he uses what and, so, but, other times he leaves these things aside. And it is a matter of instability, even at the level of language when he is talking. The narrator now depicts change of his inner world and distancing himself from the guilt in consuming an excess of alcohol and the various deeds that he knows will happen. Such images make the narrator appear as the victim rather than the criminal. He blames Pluto at the end. So you see, the first part of the paragraph starts when he said, "When reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty, but it was at best a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched." You see, he used and, but, which is a matter of of synthetic listing. A synthetic listing occurs also at the same time, but we find a lot that now he is using the coordinators and or but. It means that the narrator cannot decide, cannot settle his mind on a particular aspect of what he is talking about. So the second part of the paragraph, I again plunged into excess and soon drowned in wine all memory of the dead. And he begins, okay, another sentence with and then came as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow the spirit of perverseness, the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder. Two long sentences, a lot of coordinators. Okay, so this is the style of someone who is really suffering from some sort of psychological conflict. Another image that Poe skillfully uses to depict the inner life of the narrator is the eyes of a Pluto, given that eyes are known as the mirror's soul after cutting out one of the cat's eyes. Also, the narrator divides his soul into two parts and cuts one half, the good one, out of himself. Shortly afterwards, he admits that the love for Pluto. We have other stylistic devices, in fact, used in this story, particularly in this particular level. And in order to emphasize the dramatic change of the narrator's attitude towards the cat, Poe himself includes paraphrases by choosing various substitutes for the word cat, which show an increasing association on dissociation with the Pluto. So these words, just like a playmate, animal, creature, beast, and tormentor, he used a lot of such words when he addressed the cat Pluto. Moreover, it is striking that after cutting out the I of Pluto, the narrator uses the personal pronoun it to refer to the cat instead of saying he as usual. This shift further signifies the increased distance between the narrator and the beloved cat. Then at the same time, we find the narrator used a lot of epithets, and epithets in fact is a functional grammatical term which means adjectives. So the epithets here: equivocal feeling, cruel deed, and hideous murder, mortal soul, fiendish malevolence, damnable, atrocity, evil thoughts. The writer applies numerous epithets to more vibrantly describe characters and settings, and many others emphasize gothic, mysterious, and horrific features of the story. We find that these epithets create suitable images in fewer words, which is beneficial for such a short story. After that, we find that the narrator presents philosophical comments and to show that he is being evil and victim at the same time. How is that? In terms of language style, we find that there is long, complicated structure or structures and highly philosophical religious lexical choices, which make clear how the narrator tries to justify his unjustified ill behavior. The repetition of but in the coming paragraph and referred to the narrator's unsettled feelings and moods concerning the cat, which is still alive. When he said the socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, frightful appearance, but, you see, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, you see, he repeated the word but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left, so to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But, you see, also again he used the word but, which is really a matter of how he contradicts a lot of ideas he presents. This long paragraph shows the narrator's internal conflict resulting from the intoxication. The external struggle presented by the cat's deliberate avoidance of the narrator ensued this internal type of a struggle, which is a matter of the spirit perverseness that overcame the narrator. Now his soul longs to commit and utter violence. The narrator now justifies that being perverse is something innate in every human soul. When he said, "Yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments, which give direction to the character of man." Man, okay, is what is written in the capital letter of M, which indicates all human beings. So here he wants to set aside the idea of being not innocent. Rather, it is normal, since this evilness is found in human nature. The general reference is made clear when he referring to man in general. followed by two rhetorical questions which support his personal opinion concerning the maltreating of others. Who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or stupid action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law merely because we understand it to be such? Now, the feeling of being perverse results in hanging the cat with full awareness now of committing a crime not under the intoxication influence. He admits now that evil controls his soul. The external struggle results in the death of the cat. This spirit of perverseness, I say, means he admits, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature. Up to the end of the paragraph, so he asserts this idea that now he is fully aware, it is not under the devil's control, right? And it is a matter of nature that man is what is inclined to violence. In this paragraph, as I said at the beginning, we find a lot of religious and philosophical terms, just like old heart, a creature, place to irritation, irrevocable, overthrow the spirit of perverseness, the primitive impulses, indivisible primary faculties, a perpetual inclination, unfathomable, consummate the injury, jeopardize my immortal soul, deadly sin, the infinitive mercy, merciful and most terrible God. In fact, in this story we find two climax, not one. Why? Because the climax here is the moment of killing the cat, the first cat, and the second is what is, instead of killing the second cat, he killed his wife. Now the first climax here, the narrator, being analytical and rational person, he didn't find any connection between the disaster of the house burned now to the ground and his perverse atrocity of killing the cat. He thus explains the damage objectively using short, simple sentences. When he said the curtains of my bed were in flames, full stop. This is a short sentence which is very direct and very clear. Then he said the whole house was blazing, full stop, short sentence. It was with a great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration, full stop. You see, okay, a series of short sentences which narrate the action after the crime, okay, with the cat, is what is a matter of direct, which is, okay, a matter of how to make the style plain without complication. The destruction was complete, full stop, you see. In fact, we have passive voice is used here, and it is to show how the first one, his murder of the cat, results in the occurrence of the second being woken up. And the catastrophe in the second one, here his wealth has gone, which is a matter of punishment. So the first passive voice is a matter of what of the cause, and the result is what is the punishment, which is also represented by the second passive voice. Metaphors are used in this paragraph, and which is a matter of description that make it very, very effective. The cry of fire, wealth was swallowed up. The narrator then confesses the deed as being most cruel when he said, I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish as consequence of cause and effect. So he's what he is, rational and analytical person. He doesn't confess that there is some sort of connection between superstition of killing the cat with this type of disaster to his house. When he said between this, the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts. So he's a man of facts. He believes only in facts and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. The final two sentences add extra remarks about the narrator's personality traits, being rational and analytical. So he is what round character, but in terms of what? In terms of facts. Now the next paragraph shows the superstitious appearance. Again we have an example of the mad mind offering up a rational rejection of anything so superstitious that the burning of the house might be retribution for his killing the cat. However, on the following day, he visited the ruins of the house and saw a crowd of people gathered about. One wall, which had just been replastered and was still wet, was still standing. It was the wall just above where his bed had previously stood. And engraved in the plaster was a perfect image of the figure of a gigantic cat, and there was a rope around the animal's neck. This description is direct with the plain expressions and simple sentences, which contribute to his analytical perspective of things. And when he said in the next paragraph, when I first beheld this apparition, once again the narrator's mad mind attempts to offer a rational explanation for his phenomena, and he believes that someone found the cat's dead body, flung it into the burning house to awaken the narrator, and the burning of the house, the falling of the walls, and the ammonia from the carcass, all these factors contributed to the creation of the graven image. But the narrator doesn't account for the fact that the image is that of gigantic cat. Thus we must assume that the image took on gigantic proportions only within the mind of the narrator. The narrator's style here is to continue to be plain in this level of description, to make the discussion of the topic of connection evident enough, and to justify his position from superstition. After this rational explanation on the part of the narrator, we find a new situation. For months the narrator couldn't forget about the black cat, and he forgot the feeling of remorse at the same time. And he wants another cat similar to Pluto, when he said, although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it didn't the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I couldn't rid myself of the phantasm of the cat. So he wants another cat. A new character and a new situation in the plot structure. In this paragraph, the narrator recounts a new stage of development with the introduction of a new round and dynamic character similar to Pluto, except the white splotches in its chest. When he said, one night as I sat half stupefied, my attention was suddenly down to some. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived as a Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. The new stage in the narrator's life is described as being in a worse living condition, when he described his new preferred place of spending the time, which is the bar. In a den of more than infamy, this is said by the narrator, which is not it is ill-reputed place. And this change is of course brought about by the previous accident on the black cat as a curse, and the narrator doesn't make any such association. The element of suspense in this paragraph is produced next when talking about the presence of the second cat, identifying it only in terms of description as a thing which is black and the location of that cat is a reference to the narrator's new life that previously destroyed him, which is alcohol. The physical description of such cat makes it a round character. When he said the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin or of rum, then he said the object. He's talking about the cat, the second cat. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large in terms of description. Indefinite splotch of white covering nearly the whole region of the breast. The barrels of intoxicating liquid now become the major component of the narrator's residence. Instead of living in a new apartment, he prefers to live in intoxication. And it is part of his new life, and there is a close connection between this cat and intoxication, since the cat preferred to sit on the barrels of alcohol. Okay, now we have a new beginning, and we have also a new story, since we have a new relationship between the narrator and the second cat. The narrator now moves us into a new story, as if the previous experience with the other animals became a past event. Just like when he said, upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. A new beginning, right? So the new character's relationship is described positively, not negatively, with dynamic interaction between the two characters, the narrator and the cat, through verbs that indicate a good beginning, just like touching, arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, appeared delighted, continued my caresses, evinced a disposition to accompany me, permitted it, patting, we have domesticated itself, became immediately a great favorite with my wife, you see? So these verbs indicate good activity between the two. From the beginning, the narrator wished it could be Pluto by using the pronouns he and him. But then the narrator soon realizes that the animal is still stranger through the use of pronoun it, several times in fact, and the animal, and then he said itself. Since we have a new relationship, so we have a new struggle, which is sustaining one in fact, just because of being under the intoxication, it means under the control of the double. The narrator is now sure about his feeling towards the second cat, when he declares, he said, no doubt to my hatred of the beast. The main cause of such detesting feeling towards the cat is the conformity between the two cats, the first one and the second one. And he said that, like a Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of its eyes. So this conformity reminds him of what of a Pluto. The narrator now shows a difference of opinion between his wife and him at this particular point. The wife still shows a stable treatment and feelings towards animals, since she didn't allow evil into herself. He confesses that to love animals means to have a human heart and to possess pure attitudes, which are highly respected. This is made clearly in the middle of the paragraph. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed in a high degree that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. He said that, okay, we share the same feelings, but this type of feeling was in the past for me, but now my wife, okay, continues this type of attitude towards other animals. Then the narrator produced a direct confession, and he opens this paragraph and closes it with a direct and plain confession of abhorrence to this cat. Though the cat showed friendly practices with the narrator, such as following the footsteps, crouching beneath the narrator's chair, springing upon the narrator's knees, covering him with caresses, getting between the narrator's feet, fastening the clothes in the narrator's dress. The internal struggle in the second part of the paragraph, to destroy or not, is evident in the second part of this paragraph, and for the narrator is still under the spell of the first cat memory. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from so doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. Once again, we find in the next paragraph that the narrator tries to set aside the idea of being under the control of evil, for he is a man believing only in rationality and explaining things in terms of analysis, not superstitions. The philosophical comment at the beginning of this paragraph is a stylistic one, which is dominant in the first part of this paragraph. Let's see here when he said, "This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own," up to the end of the sentence. The reference to the coming and second crime is foreshadowed here in this paragraph through the use of certain nouns, adjectives, and verbs of violence, such as the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. My reason struggled to reject as fanciful. It had at length shudder, loathed, dreaded, monster, dared, hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows, mournful and terrible engine of horror and crime, of agony and of death. You see a mixture of nouns, adjectives, and verbs which indicate violence. It means that the narrator, when he spoke out such words, means that he has some sort of a sustained feeling of violence. Next we have another confession. Now it is rendered before, okay, he killed his wife. The narrator now endeavors to justify the coming murder of his wife, which is described as insufferable woe, with being under the devilish superiority of evil. The next crime, as the narrator recounts later, is justified for his behalf, for the cat now is vexing the narrator, annoying him, and this annoyance is made explicit through activities practiced by the cat with the narrator, just like insufferable woe, knew I the blessing of rest any more, the creature left me no moment alone, started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face. I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart, beneath the pressure of torments such as these. The feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Now, these unwelcomed practices result in the rebirth of ill thoughts in the narrator's mind, a disposition of hatred and ill plans that prepare the reader to anticipate bad and cruel things that will result in near future. This is asserted in the second part of the paragraph. Evil thoughts became my soul intimates, the darkest, most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of a fury to such I now blindly abandoned myself. My uncomplaining wife, Alice, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. Now, after that, narrator moves to tell us about the external conflict and the second crime. Now, the narrator is telling us the second crime, and he uses the non-finite ing form of the verb to bring the crime into a current situation, as if the narrator is still experiencing the crime now, and to distance himself from the direct guilt when he said throwing, uplifting, forgetting. The reference to a new setting is not linked to the result of the curse brought about him, right, or his wife. Especially after killing the previous cat. He admits that poverty compels them to live in such unsuitable residence when he said, upon some household around, into the cellar of the old building, which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The narrator wants in this paragraph, and in vain, to justify for his evil deed by making himself object in most of these sentences of preferring to use the pronoun me instead of I. So one day she accompanied me. The cat followed me, nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me. You see, 4 times he repeated the word me. And then, when committing the crime against his wife, the narrator doesn't distance himself. Rather, he makes explicit reference to himself using the pronoun I, followed by short declarative sentences with simple past tense in an attempt to make the image of the crime very evident and conspicuous. When he said, I aimed a blow at the animal, would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished by the hand of my wife. I withdrew my arm from her grasp and the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without groan. The action of committing the crime against his against his wife is described in figurative and poetic style. He uses metaphoric expressions such as a blow repeated twice and buried personification, right, is used to specify his action as a matter of external fight. Arrested also is used, and the use of imperfect rhyme to close the scenario of the crime, telling the procedure in this particular plain style and effectual style, in fact. Her brain without a groan. You see, brain and groan, imperfect style, which shows the psychological perplexity of the narrator now in prison. He is not stable at the level of thinking and emotions. The shift on part of the narrator from finite forms into non-finite clearly indicates his unstable psyche in the prison, now at the level of narrating such events. The previous paragraph shows the second climax, in fact, when trying to kill the second cat. Instead, he killed his wife. Now we have the resolution phase, which shows a fast movement of events and actions after the narrator's commitment of the second crime. The narrator's narrative is now rendered in a series of past simple tense that marks out the spontaneous decisions and a resulting action, which is a matter of sequentiality. And this sequentiality is arranged in steps. Most of the verbs used in this stage are mental ones, which show in turn the narrator's internal struggle. When he said, I said, I knew, I couldn't remove, many projects entered my mind, I thought, I resolved, I deliberated, I hit upon what I considered, I determined. So this is the matter of the psychological conflict for the narrator in this particular situation inside the prison. After that, we have a direct confession made by the narrator when he said, and when he recounts in a minute detail the sight of hiding his wife's corpse. The description is rendered in short, plain sentences with copular verbs followed by or preceded by identifying nouns or describing adjectives. For example, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed. rough plaster. In one of the walls was a projection. The action of hiding the corpse in the wall is told as a confession with the explicit reference to the self I with past simple tense to show how fast the narrator was in accomplishing his action. I made no doubt up to the end of this long structure, which is I prepared a plaster which couldn't be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. The murder is done in cold blood without showing any sign of remorse. Even now, when he is in prison and narrating this violent crime, when I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall didn't present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here at last, then my labour has not been in vain." Now we have very fast resolution and we have a chronological order of events, and by chronological order it means that event happens after event according to time span. The first part of this paragraph, in fact, is devoted to the narrator's will to continue destroying the other cat, searching in vain to find it, for he assigns the killing of the wife for the presence of this cat. When he said, "My next step was to look for the beast," now he describes it as beast, which had been the cause of so much wretchedness. He's trying to say that I'm not guilty. It is the cat. "For I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at the moment, there could have been no doubt for its fate, but it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger and forbore to present itself in my present mood." So, till this stage, the narrator never shows a sorrowful mood or remorse. On the contrary, he tells of his relief after the disappearance of the cat, when he said, "It is impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It didn't make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul." You see, he feels, so relaxed. Now we approach the end, and the narrator's insanity is confirmed in this particular stage of narration, since he declares that he is careless, happy, and carefree about the previous two crimes. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. The irony here is that he believes he is free, which is a situational irony, in that he as a narrator expects the opposite of what will happen later, in fact. And when being arrested, right, another irony appears here when he shows his overconfidence the moment when the police started searching the house. This overconfidence is a situational irony that the narrator's belief is not what he expects shortly afterwards. "I felt no embarrassment whatever." This is the very direct statement made by the narrator. The narrative of the police search for the corpse and his psyche then shows how the narrator is really unshaken, so he never tried to show his crime to the authority, which is a matter of not attempt of showing remorse, and a change in his future vile and devilish crimes to come. Upon the 4th day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the insecurability of my place of concealment, now the officers made me accompany them up to the end of the paragraph. So he shows no sign or remorse, okay, and a violent, devilish style of thinking. Next, we have a moment before the discovery of the corpse. The narrator exposes at this level of narration his insanity when he shows the police the exact place, undeliberate, of course, in an act of bravado, with his stick and with a heavy banging on the wall behind which the corpse is buried. So he said, "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, "I may say an excellently well constructed house. These walls are, you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together," and he is scratching with what? With the stick on these walls. His narrative confession concerning the dialogue with the police officer affirms his disordered mind when he said, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well constructed house." In the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. So this is a confession, right? It means that the narrator was unaware of what he's talking about. After that, the moment of discovery comes out, and he raps so heavily upon the bricks that entomb his wife, that to his abject terror, a voice from within the tomb answered. At first it was a muffled and a broken cry, but then it swelled into an utterly anomalous and inhuman howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have risen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony, and of the demons that exult in the damnation. This level of description is rendered with a long complex sentence with synthetic listing that directly reflects his mind perplexity, horror, and the breathless excitement. Some metaphoric expressions are used to make the sensory image highly influential. For example, when he said, "God shield the fangs of the archfiend," and when he said at in the last sentence, "the throats of the damned in their agony." In the conclusion, the police started right away removing the brick wall, and they discover the corpse of the narrator's wife, and upon her head was the disappeared cat. The second cat, of course. There is a situational irony here. When he finds the cat, this moment of discovery makes it a moment of rest instead of finding it and killing the cat.